The day Carolyn Mitchell was forced to leave her family's home felt like both the end of her world and the beginning of a punishment she believed she deserved, for though she had never intended to fall into the arms of the wrong man, never imagined herself carrying a child without a ring or even the promise of a future, life had twisted cruelly, stripping her of the little security she had clung to and branding her as a woman who had broken every rule her small town held sacred. And as she walked down the dusty road with her meager belongings stuffed into a weathered carpetbag, her hand protectively brushing over the small swell of her stomach, the whispers of neighbors echoed behind curtained windows, venom wrapped in pity, scorn disguised as sorrow, and each step made her feel more like an exile than a daughter of the land she had called home her whole life, for her father had refused to even look at her when he told her to leave. Her mother had wept silently in the corner, torn between love and loyalty to her husband, and her brothers had simply turned away as if her existence was a stain upon the Mitchell name, and though she wanted to scream that she had been deceived, that the man she had trusted had whispered promises of forever only to vanish the moment responsibility touched his name, Carolyn knew none of it would matter, because in their eyes she had sinned and now bore the visible proof of that sin in the curve of her belly. And so with the sun burning hot on her shoulders and the ache of betrayal clawing at her heart, she headed toward the only place she thought she might find work, the Carson Ranch, where she had heard whispers of a cowboy who hired help without questions and cared little for the gossip of church ladies, and though she feared rejection, feared another slammed door, desperation gave her courage she didn't know she still possessed. And as she crested a hill and saw the wide spread of land stretching out like a sea of golden grass, the fences neat and strong, the barns weathered but proud, her heart beat with both dread and fragile hope, for if she could just turn her keep here, just find a roof and a meal, maybe she could bring her child into the world without shame eating her alive, and maybe, just maybe, she could learn how to start again even while carrying the shadows of her past. And it was then, as she drew closer, that she saw him, Wyatt Carson, leaning against the porch rail of the ranch house, tall and broad with a quiet strength that seemed carved from the very earth he stood on, his hat pulled low against the sun, a man who had lived through storms and carried them still in the steel-gray eyes that lifted to meet hers as she approached, and Carolyn felt her throat tighten because there was no judgment in that gaze, only a curiosity tempered with something softer, like a man who had seen enough brokenness in the world to recognize it when it walked toward him, and when she stopped at the edge of the porch, unsure if she should speak or turn and flee, Wyatt pushed off the railing with a slow, deliberate ease, boots crunching in the dirt, and he said in a voice that rolled like distant thunder yet carried a gentleness that caught her off guard, "Ma'am, you look in for work?" And though her lips trembled, she forced herself to nod, whispering that she could cook, clean, mend clothes, anything that needed doing, her eyes flicking downward because she feared if he looked too closely he would see what she carried and send her away. But Wyatt only studied her for a long moment, as if weighing more than her words, weighing her soul itself, and then he tipped his hat and said, "Supper's at 6, chores start at sunup. You're welcome here if you're willing to work," and Carolyn almost broke right there on the porch, almost fell to her knees with relief. For those words felt like a lifeline cast into the dark waters she had been drowning in, and though she wanted to confess everything, to lay bare her shame and see it rejected quickly rather than let kindness linger too long, something about his steady gaze held her tongue, and she simply whispered her thanks, clutching her bag tighter, following him inside where the air smelled of cedar and coffee, the walls worn but sturdy. The kind of home that had weathered years of storms yet still stood tall, and as he showed her the small room she could sleep in, simple but clean, with a bed and a quilt that looked like it had been stitched by loving hands long ago, Carolyn felt the first flicker of something dangerous but irresistibly hope, and it scared her more than the judgment of her family, for hope was a fragile thing, too easily broken, and she did not think she could survive another shattering. Yet when she looked up at Wyatt again, at the quiet strength in his stance and the patience in his silence, she felt something in her begin to believe that maybe not all men abandoned, maybe not all hearts turned cold, and that night, as she lay on the quilt staring at the wooden beams above her, her hand resting on the curve of her belly, She whispered to the child within her that they might just be safe here, that they might just have found someone who wouldn't cast them out, though deep down she knew the truth could not remain hidden forever, for gossip in towns like hers traveled faster than the wind, and sooner or later Wyatt would hear every sordid tale, every cruel exaggeration, and then the moment of reckoning would come. But until then she allowed herself, for the first time in months, to fall asleep with something close to peace in her heart, unaware that Wyatt himself stood on the porch beneath the stars, smoking slow and silent, thinking of the woman with haunted eyes who had walked onto his land that day, and though he did not know her story, did not know the burden she carried, something in him had already decided that whatever her past was, it would not scare him away, because he too carried ghosts that could never be buried, scars that no gossip could touch. And maybe, just maybe, the two of them had crossed paths not by chance but by the hand of fate that often worked in ways men like him could never fully understand.